What's up, Buckeye fans? Welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I am Patrick Murphy here with you, and we've got a busy show today. We are going to talk recruiting. We've had another week of recruiting camps, one-day camps at Ohio State, and a busy official visit weekend upcoming. We're going to talk about the Ross Bjork press conference, which I know has been covered extensively by Dave Biddle and Jay Book on the Bucknuts Morning Five. But there are some other things I want to touch on from that came out of the nearly 75 minutes we got with the Ohio State athletic director. So before we get into that, though, as always, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, comments, all that. It really helps. And then if you're listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please give us a 5-star review and leave comments. All of those are super helpful for us here in the podcasting world. But because we have a busy show and we are limited on some time here, I want to get right into it. So I'm going to bring in our recruiting guru over at Bucknuts, Bill Kurelic. Bill, this is the time of the year when I see you the most. We talk a lot, but I see you the most. It's mostly in person, but it's nice to see you again on this screen. So I'd ask how you're doing, but I basically know that you're up to here and work right now. So thank you for coming on with us.
Yeah, this is the time of the year you hate. You have to see me the most.
No, I love it. I love it. It also gets me out of the house for all these camps.
Yeah, the help you give with the all the camps is immeasurable for sure.
I appreciate that, and I'm here to serve. I want to start with Elijah Hall, the running back who announced his commitment to Ohio State on Friday morning. He was out at camp this week. What can you tell the fine Buckeye fans watching and listening to this about Hall? And obviously a 2028 kid from Florida, so a long way to go until he signs on the dotted line. But what should Buckeye fans know about Elijah?
Well, provided he does sign on the dotted line in a few years. And again, he's committed and he really likes Ohio State. So, if this were somebody maybe not from Florida, we might be saying, why would you even think he's not going to sign with Ohio State? But he is from a long distance away, and he is going to be a highly, and I mean highly coveted running back before he's done. So Carlos Lachlan and the Buckeyes are going to have to, hang on to him and get him signed when that time comes. It is a long way away, class of 2028. But providing they do just that, and again, there's certainly reason to believe that they will too, because he likes Ohio State a lot. And he got an offer from Ohio State back on May 2nd, and then he got up to Ohio State, as you said, Pat, earlier this week for a camp, one-day camp. It was very impressive. He's close to 6 foot tall, and he weighs about 195 or so pounds. Very, very fast. And I think he has a chance to be a game-breaking type guy in college. He had early scholarship offers from Miami, the Hurricanes, that is, of course, not the Miami of Ohio, Miami, Florida, UCF, Florida Atlantic. I should say Florida State, not Florida. He had Miami and Florida State. So, most of the programs in Florida already had offered him a scholarship, which tells you a lot. So really, he's a guy, again, that I think in about 2 years, everybody's going to be talking about. This is one of the country's elite running backs. Typically we don't rank guys that far out. It's just a really difficult thing to do. So he's not got a ranking yet, but he will. And when he does, I project him to be probably a high 4-star to a 5-star guy eventually.
Yeah, Carlos Lachlan doesn't generally just it's like Brian Hartline, right? You're not just handing out scholarship offers, especially to kids that young, without recognizing the talent. As I posted on the front row when people were talking about the fact that it's hard to get excited about a 2028 kid, Carlos Lachlan understands that, but to get in early, to get him to commit this early, I think is a good sign for the Buckeyes. And who knows what happens over the next few years. A lot could happen in that time. But like you said, I was pretty impressed with him. Obviously, Carlos Laughlin was as well out at camp, or else I don't think he would be the first person to commit to the 2028 recruiting class. If you had to make a gut call right now, and I know we're a ways away, do you think he ends up remaining in the class, or do you think that it's just too early to tell?
Well, since he committed this early, I'm going to go with he stays in the class. But again, I think it's Miami's not going to stop recruiting him. Florida State is not going to stop recruiting him. Do I think he's going to visit a lot of other schools between now and signing day for him? Yeah, I think he's going to visit other schools. But he is a Buckeye commitment. And, if you're Ohio State, you're not going to you've got what I think will be one of the top running backs in the country. You're not going to say, no, we need to slow down. We need to hold off. You can't commit here. You're just not going to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think that the Buckeyes know what they're doing in this. They have experience recruiting kids out of Florida. And you just have to look at Jeremiah Smith for an example of a guy who committed fairly early on in his high school career and hung on. There are obviously examples the other way as well. So we'll see what happens there. Bill, we talked about the camps. I briefed you on this before we started, but who are maybe a couple of players that you saw this week that you thought really stood out to you that people should be aware of?
Well, maybe we also had a camp last week, so I won't leave that camp out, but definitely Brady Edmonds. He's an Ohio State quarterback commitment for a reason, because he's really, really good. And by the way, he has a great family. What a wonderful family. His dad, his mom, his brother, who is a 2029 tight end defensive end, and his sister all were at Ohio State in Columbus this week, and got to meet all of them. But definitely Brady Edmonds. He's got a really good arm. He's 215 pounds, but he looks thin. At 6'5", he looks thin. He's gonna be a 6'5", 240 pounder in a few years. I'm very confident. And when he gets to Ohio State, he's going to be a 240 pounder after a year or two with the Mick Marotti program that is solid as a rock. And his arm, the ball gets there in a hurry. He spins it well. He gets there in a hurry. In fact, sometimes he may overthrow it. He throws it so hard. But under Ryan Day and Billy Fessler and Brian Hartline, he'll learn all the intricacies of that. But he's definitely one of them. Another one was the guy we saw yesterday, Cooper Witten. He's the real deal. For his high school in the Dallas area, he kind of plays more of like a running safety type position where he lines up relatively deep. He's running towards the line of scrimmage, and he's a force. He's not going to be a safety at Ohio State or anywhere else he might go. He's going to be a linebacker, and I think he's going to be a great one wherever he goes. And he is the son of Jason Witten, former Dallas Cowboy. So obviously the bloodlines are there.
Not bad.
Sincere Johnson really impressed me, linebacker from here in Ohio, Cleveland Glenville. He is, when I saw him as a freshman, and one of the Glenville people told me this is our next great one, he didn't really necessarily look that part back then. He was just a freshman, but he has toned his body. He has worked his way into being a great looking prospect. And I watched him on this week at Ohio State's camp, and that's what he's going to be, a great player in college. I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say that. So he really impressed me. The tight end, Ahmad Hudson, that strolled into camp as a basketball star. He was very impressive. He's long and just a great athlete. Jalen Brewster from Texas really impressed me. He is not the number one prospect in the country on the defensive line for no reason at all. Again, Ahmad Hudson is a 2027 guy, and so is Jalen Brewster, and a guy that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think I'd name, but guy that really impressed me was Danny Lang, the quarterback from Mater Dei High School in Santa Ana, California. When he was going against the top wide receiver or two at camp this week, I mean, he did a fantastic job. He was going against Jameer Brown, and those were two tremendous battles. When those guys went against each other, it was the real thing.
Yeah, I wrote on Bucknuts, if you want to read it, about those battles and the two guys. There was a little trash talk between the two of them. Two potential future teammates, as Jameer Brown obviously already committed to Ohio State, and Danny Lang, as he told you, Bill, very interested in the Buckeyes. I agree with all of those guys. A couple guys I will add.
Real quick before you go on to, not only was there trash talk between the two, but the Ohio State wide receivers that were there, Carnell Tate, et cetera, and the Ohio State defensive backs that were there. There was a lot of trash talk going on there as well. But sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's a good point. It's a lot of fun when they do the one-on-ones and the players are out there and they start, just getting into it, especially when there's guys that, they know or is a big-time talent or a couple big-time talents out there. That's a lot of fun. A couple other guys I will mention. Bryson Wright, the wide receiver. I wrote about him as well. He's a guy who I thought looked really crisp. We talk about those one-on-ones. He was close to unstoppable in some of those. He is a 2028 wide receiver. I know that you were slacking on Wednesday, did not come out to the 7-on-7 camp to watch Jameer Brown and Dakota.
Slacker.
Yes, right. Total slacker. Dakota Garant, though, the wide receiver out of Michigan, was really impressive in the 7-on-7s. Hard to take a ton from that, given some of the competition he's going against, but you could just see the talent oozing off of him. One of the games I watched, he scored 3 touchdowns, and he was wide open. Actually, when I first walked into the camp, you kind of walk in over by the baseball field at the Woody Hayes, and I was looking at my phone and I look up and he had caught a touchdown right at the end zone that's right there and was backing up basically into me. And he had his name on the back of his shirt. So I knew immediately who it was. There was not a cornerback within 15 yards of the end zone. He had gotten that open in a small, half field 7-on-7 game. He was very impressive. And it's obvious why the Buckeyes are very interested in him. And then you mentioned 2027 quarterbacks when you were talking about Brady Edmonds, but the Buckeyes are interested in maybe having 2 in there. Elijah Haven, he, as far as we know, Bill, unless something's changed since we talked earlier, did not get a scholarship offer from the Buckeyes, but he is the number 1 quarterback in the 2027 class. I thought he looked every bit the part. He's a Louisiana kid, so it's hard to get those kids out of Louisiana, but I thought he looked pretty outstanding when I was watching him. So those are just a few other names I wanted to add in addition to what you, the list you had. Anything on any of those guys?
Yeah, first of all, I got to go back. I said Slacker, but that name, little off the topic slightly story, that came from my son, tremendously hard worker, was a basketball guy and baseball guy too, for that matter. But I think he was in 8th grade, and one of his 8th grade teachers jokingly named him Slacker. He is anything but that. He's tremendously hardworking young man, Matt Kurelic. But that's where that name came from. Mr. O'Neill at Worthington Christian High School nicknamed my son Slacker.
Interesting. I can see where he got the hard work, given what you do every day on Bucknuts. Let's look ahead, though. Speaking of hard work, the Buckeyes have some work ahead of them this weekend. It's another weekend of official visits. What do Buckeye fans need to know, Bill, about who's coming and what may happen over this upcoming weekend?
Well, I mentioned Sincere Johnson. He is making his official visit to Ohio State this weekend. He has already made official visits to Penn State and Alabama. It's down to those 3 schools. He will announce his decision on June 19th. And again, it's down to those 3 schools. I've crystal balled Sincere to Ohio State, and I still feel good about that pick. But again, he's making his official visit this weekend, and I think that they'll do a great job of impressing him. I really believe, and I believe that in the end, that will pay off for Ohio State. Like I said, he's a tremendous football player. His teammate, Jameer Perez, a defensive lineman from Glenville, he is making his official visit to Ohio State this weekend as a Florida commitment. He committed to the Gators when he visited down there, and that's not any sure thing flip. Getting Perez to flip from Florida to Ohio State, but we'll see. I think the Glenville guys usually do. They almost never go. The ones Ohio State wants anywhere else but Ohio State. But again, he's somebody that'll be visiting Ohio State this weekend. And speaking of defensive linemen, there are some really other good defensive linemen making official visits to Ohio State this weekend. Carter Meadows from Washington, D.C., Gonzaga. Jackson Ford from Malvern Prep High School, a 6'4", 240-pounder, Pennsylvania. And P.J. Pierre Dean, who I really like a lot, from North Carolina. In Dean's case, he's got it down to 3 schools. And the 3 are Ohio State, Georgia, and South Carolina. He's got a family connection at Georgia. But on the other hand, Ohio State gets the last shot this weekend because he's already made official visits to the other 2. So that's certainly a name to keep in mind. Danny Odom, a cornerback out of the First Academy High School in Orlando, Florida, is making an official visit. Justin Fitzpatrick, another great corner that Ohio State would have liked to have also added to the class. He's not making an official visit this weekend. He remains committed to Georgia. So Danny Odom, perhaps he fills that spot. We'll see. And then you've got 4 Ohio State commitments. There are 3 offensive line commitments: Sam Greer, Maxwell Riley, and Tucker Smith. That is a trio that, in my mind, is going to be a great infusion of offensive line talent to Ohio State. They're all making their official visits. And then CJ Santa, the linebacker from really right up the road from me, Matt Kurelic, who I spoke about, he went to Olentangy Orange. But CJ Santa goes to Olentangy High School. So those 4 are making their official visits to Ohio State this weekend. And, I never like to say never in recruiting, but if any of those 4 guys didn't actually sign with Ohio State, I would absolutely be shocked. I love the Buckeyes' chances of signing those 4 guys who've committed.
What would you put the likelihood that Buckeye fans should be on commitment watch coming out of this weekend's official visit list, given how many guys you just named? And some of those names I think are pretty familiar to Buckeye fans who follow recruiting.
Yeah, I think actually, I think at this point you're always on commitment watch because you've had 2 official visit weekends already, and you've got a 3rd one this weekend, and you've only got 1 more to go in the month of June next weekend. So at this point, you're always on commitment watch. But I think, other than Perez, I think as a possibility, I think the more likelihood is that somebody that's already made an official visit to Ohio State would decide either this weekend or early next week to pull the trigger and commit to the Buckeyes.
And we know next week is the last week of the one-day camps. Just so people know, what is the schedule for next week? I know there's 1 one-day camp and 2 7-on-7s, but just so people know what to look out for.
Yeah, there is a team camp, a 7-on-7 camp on Monday, June 16th, and that was an added camp. In the original schedule, they had just 2 team camps scheduled, and the popularity of these 7-on-7 team camps is sky high right now. So they added a team camp, and as of yesterday, when I left Ohio State's one-day camp, as of then, there were 16 teams scheduled to be at the Monday team camp. That's a little different than the first team camp that you were at. That one had 32 teams. Right now, this one has 16 team camps, but they were still taking, if they can get the right teams and the right number of teams, they'll add teams to that. But as of yesterday, there were 16 teams scheduled. There is a final team camp on Wednesday, June 18th. That's the final team camp, the final summer camp of the month of June for Ohio State. That's going to be an important one in that I'm going to be very interested to watch Teddy Gerard. He is a 2027 quarterback out of Georgia, and he is really, really good. I think if Ohio State could add him right now to Brady Edmonds, they would love to do that, I think. I think Teddy Gerard is that good. He is going to be quarterbacking the house team on Wednesday. They not a high school team coming here. It's a house team of recruits, prospects. Ohio State puts together a group of those kids that want to do a team camp, and they call him the house team. And he's going to be the quarterback. So I think that's going to be very interesting. I'm looking forward to watching that one. So I will not be a slacker for sure on Wednesday. In between those two camps, you've got Tuesday, June 17th, the last one-day camp of the summer for Ohio State. And typically the final one-day camp of the summer is pretty filled with great prospects. So there's no reason for me to believe that won't be the case on Tuesday, as, again, that wraps up the high Ohio State one-day camps for this summer.
Well, hopefully you'll make it out to all those, so we don't have to call you a slacker the next time we have you on. But no, I'm just kidding, Bill. I know how busy you are. We talked earlier, and I'm glad you graciously gave me about 20 minutes here to talk recruiting, and I think everyone will enjoy this, whether they listen to it live or listen to it after the fact. So thank you for hopping on.
I appreciate that, Pat. You do a great job, and I'm sure we'll talk more than once the rest of this weekend before we start at the camps next week.
Yeah, there is no doubt about that. I will talk to you soon. All right. Thanks again to Bill Kurelic for jumping on with us. He is he originally said he probably couldn't do this. I followed up with him again today, and I was like, because Bill and I have started, if you haven't seen it, he calls it In the Dean's Office Live, where we talk mostly recruiting. We're trying to do it once a week, but it's been a little busy with some of these camps. We did not do one this week. And I was like, Bill, we didn't do a podcast earlier this week. Can't you give me just like 15, 20 minutes? He's like, all right, I can give you 20 minutes. So he went about 21 minutes. So we went a little bit over on that. I was going to see if we had time for questions for Bill. We did not. So I apologize for that. But if you have any other questions, I can try and answer recruiting questions. I'm not a recruiting expert. I don't claim to be one. But if you have those and you're watching this live, want to throw those in there, or any questions you may have about college football, college athletics, we're going to get into some interesting topics, I think, here with coming out of that Ross Bjork press conference. So feel free if you have anything you want to ask or comments you want to make as we go, throw those in the chat. If you're watching this live, we'll try and address those as we go. If you have not watched the Ross Bjork press conference, I recommend doing it. It is long. It's about 75 minutes. He talked way longer than I expected on Thursday, but a lot of information on there. And it's not just about the House settlement from last week or NIL, revenue sharing, all that. There were a lot of topics covered. I know, as I said off the top, Dave Biddle and Jay Book were talking about this on the Bucknuts Morning 5 on Friday morning. So I'm going to try and not be too redundant. I did listen to that show just to get a sense of what they were talking about. But there were some things that I thought still needed, I still wanted to address, and I may overlap a little bit. But I want to start with kind of how Ohio State determined where this revenue sharing money is going to go. And if you haven't heard, the four sports that Ohio State is going to do the revenue sharing with is football, as we expect, men's and women's basketball, and women's volleyball. And the decision to do it that way plays a part. Well, it plays a part in the fact that Ohio State also added, I believe it was 91 scholarships, which will go towards those other sports that aren't getting some of the revenue sharing. And the way scholarships work these days is a little different than I think people have imagined it in the past or how it's worked in the past. Like, essentially, you are given a pot of money instead of individual scholarships. And you can kind of break that up. And if you followed non-revenue sports, this is no news to you. But for instance, I'm just going to use an example. I'm going to use a basketball example. Bruce Thornton, and I know this to be true, Bruce Thornton's scholarship, from my understanding, is not a full scholarship because some of it is coming out of his NIL money. Whether or not that came from Bruce deciding, hey, I'd like to help out the team and kind of give some money back, or if that's just the way it worked, I'm not really sure. But I know that, like, Bruce, you don't just get handed a scholarship anymore. It's basically money towards your tuition, and it changes depending on whether you're an out-of-state guy, in-state guy, those type of things, woman as well. So Ohio State has sort of altered, not really altered. I guess that's kind of all the way it's done, but the way we're looking at it is different now. So with these non-revenue sports and the four that aren't included in the revenue sharing, they will have more scholarship money and be able to decide what to do with it. That will play into the creation of the Center for Sports Intelligence, helping to decide kind of where to recruit and things like that. But how did they end up with those four sports? Well, football's easy. Basketball, men's basketball, women's basketball. I think we expected all of those. But the way that they decided to allocate the money between those four sports, and I guess I should say women's volleyball, Ross Bjork was asked about this and said that it's a growing sport. They have the Kurelic Center. It's been popular, and it's a sport they're really trying to build. It was an odd one to me. I'm going to be honest. I did not expect that to be, if I was told beforehand to guess the four sports, that would not have been the fourth one. But there seems to be an effort to help grow that even further. And look, it's been a good sport for Ohio State. But in terms of how much each program is going to get, Ross Bjork did not go into those details, unsurprisingly, because he has, I won't say gotten in trouble before for throwing out numbers, but I do think he learned a bit of a lesson on what putting numbers out there can do last season with the football team, and talking about what they're paying NIL and things like that for that roster. But they did use the metrics in terms of like how much revenue is coming in from each sport, how to disperse it that way, which I thought was interesting. It's not just like football's getting 75% and the other three sports are splitting the other 25%. So it's done based on kind of what the incoming revenue is, which I guess makes sense, right? Like, why would you not break it down that way? I assume, depending on how other schools decide to do their revenue sharing, that they'll use similar metrics to decide on that. Another thing, and actually, I wanted to say this off the top. I think the biggest thing that came out of the Ross Bjork press conference was how prepared he was, how prepared Ohio State was, and like just how much he is the right guy for this job, especially at this time. I know there were some, I'll say, skeptics when Ross Bjork was hired because of some of the stuff that happened at Texas A&M. The decision to extend Jimbo Fisher at the time, which has been explained to some degree and wasn't all on Ross Bjork, but there were just some questions about him as an athletic director and taking over Ohio State. And I think if you've paid attention to things Ross Bjork said, the way things have been run I think it's just a year under his watch, I think given everything that's going on in college athletics right now, he is the right guy to handle that. And I think if you do watch that press conference, you will see, just the preparedness he had to answer some of these questions. Again, 75 minutes worth of him standing at a podium and talking to us, answering questions. It wasn't like he just filibustered for most of that. He did give an introductory statement, but the vast majority of it was answering our questions. And I just think that Ohio State is in a really good place to move forward. And he is a big reason why, they are set up to have success. And I'm not just talking football, even though, to use Ross Bjork's words, football is king, but I think other sports as well. And I've seen firsthand him make the effort to be at other games, and not that Gene Smith or any other athletic director doesn't do that. But while he recognizes that football is where, the athletic department's going to make its money, he knows that they want to have success in all 36 varsity sports, which he stressed, and he was asked about why keep those. And, he said it was important. He said that was outlined to him pretty early. And that was always part of the plan, was they want to keep all 36 sports and figure out a way to do that. So again, I came away impressed with Ross Bjork, and I thought that was important to note as well. One thing he said that really caught my ear, I guess. He was talking about kind of the college athletics schedule, and this specifically relates to football, but you can extrapolate to other sports. But the calendar of the year, I guess is how I should put it, not necessarily the schedule. He talked about he thinks every season should have 2 bye weeks because that is better for the student athletes. And I'm going to cheers to that one. By the way, drinking Red Stripe again. I didn't have time to introduce that before Bill got on. But 2 bye weeks. Last season, it happens every so often. Last season, there were 2 bye weeks because of the way the calendar worked. And I think from a personal standpoint, I love when there are 2 bye weeks. While I work every weekend during the college football season, it does give me a little bit more time. It also just allows me to watch college football, which I try and do as much as possible during the season. But obviously on weekends when you are going to cover games, especially on the road, it makes it a bit more difficult, right? I remember back to just being a fan and bye weeks, while I wanted to watch Ohio State play, it did allow me to watch other games. And, this was obviously before DVR and I didn't have multiple televisions or things like that. But growing up and stuff, well, I didn't like bye weeks as much. I did find a way to appreciate them. And I think from a fan perspective, I don't know, you may disagree with me, let me know. But I think it is nice to have that time to, just see what else is going on across college football, take a whole day and check out different teams and not have to be so laser focused in on one team as a fan. I don't know if everyone likes that. I do know I've talked to some people that, hey, that's a weekend where I can go and get some other stuff done and maybe step away from college athletics. I don't know what that's like, but from a on-field perspective, I think Ross Bjork made a good point. Like, especially as we go into this, continue, I guess I should say, the expanded playoff, and it's probably going to expand further. These guys are playing a lot of games, and you're almost looking at an NFL length regular season, at least with what the Buckeyes did a year ago, right? So having 2 bye weeks is beneficial, I think, because while a lot of these guys at the Ohio State level are built like NFL players, not everybody, right? And so the chance to rehabilitate, kind of get fresh, I think it makes the game better. And I think Ross Bjork agrees. I would like to see that as a thing every season. But he also talked about in terms of the calendar, when can recruits sign? And this has been a topic for a long time. This is nothing new. But, if a player, and he mentioned, if a player is committed and ready to do it, why does he have to wait? And obviously, the early signing period in December, that was supposed to help with some of that. But now, the calendar is so crazy, and we'll get to some of the other stuff. But you've got the early signing period where I don't know what percentage, but a vast majority of kids now sign. So would it make sense to have an early signing period way earlier? Maybe the summer before their senior year or something like that. Like, does it make sense to have one in December and one in February? I don't know. I get why it's that way. It's sort of it has been at least considered kind of the end of the regular season in college football, but now there's just so much going on. I remember last year for signing day, a lot of the questions Ryan Day got asked during his press conference during the December early signing period, I should say, were about the team and the playoff and things like that, and not so much about the kids and whatnot. So should kids be able to sign earlier? That's something that he'd like to have addressed. Should they be able to sign whenever they're ready? I don't know if I would get on board with that. I think it at least needs to be sometime starting around their senior year, because I think you'd run into kids signing something early on. We were talking with Bill about the running back who just committed. I'm having a senior moment here, even though I'm not that old. Elijah Hall. Sorry. I was thinking Elijah Wood. I knew that wasn't right. Elijah Hall. Like, obviously he just finished his freshman year of high school. If he were to sign right now, there's a good likelihood that he would want to try and get out of that. So you don't want to do it too early, but could you do it earlier than you do now? So the kids don't have to worry about it. The coaches know that guy is locked in. While you still are in contact and things with that player, you don't have to continue to recruit all the way into December of their senior year. So I think that's an interesting thing. And then the transfer portal window. Do we need 2 of those in college football? Ross Bjork talked about if we are committed to these players being student athletes, which was a big thing. He talked about, they're still going to go to class and they're still going to play games. Why is the transfer portal in the middle of the year? Now, if you are just a regular student, I guess you can transfer at that point in time, but there's just a lot more that goes into it. So should there just be one transfer portal window, and when should that be? He brought up maybe having it at the end of spring or at the end of the academic year, which I think makes a lot of sense. You could do it after spring football. That way guys aren't trying to, leave during the school year. Even if the school year is still going on, like you can finish out your academic year if you enter the transfer portal and, find your new school. To me, that makes a lot of sense. And look, again, that the time of year, December, early January with the playoff and everything now, that there's too much going on then that coaches have to worry about. I think moving that back would make a lot of sense, but Ross Bjork's, that's one of the things he talked about. The calendar in general, he stressed just needs to be addressed. And I think that, that's something that most athletic directors, most college football coaches, and you could talk to Jake Diebler about this. Now, basketball only has one transfer portal window. It is after the regular season, but you saw with basketball, the Ohio State basketball program this past year, well, they didn't enter one of the postseason tournaments, partially because they knew guys were going to leave. Would there be enough players still left on the team? All those type of things. So that all needs to be addressed. There's no doubt about it. And then Ross Bjork was asked, and I thought this was really interesting, about does this revenue sharing, which seemingly levels the playing field, right? Because more or less everyone is paying the same amount. You have this cap, which is basically 22 million or 21.5 million, I think is what it is. And then it actually is more like 18 million because of the scholarships the Buckeyes have dedicated to other programs. But you basically have this cap on this revenue sharing. Well, doesn't that mean that now a program like Ohio State and a program like, I don't know, Michigan State, Northwestern, I don't know, pick a team that's not, quite on Ohio State's level. We're talking football here. Doesn't that level the playing field between teams? And he admitted, to a little bit. Now, there are obviously still NIL and things like that you can use. And Ohio State is still in a very good spot to do all of that. And it's all going to be consolidated into this Buckeye Sports Group. It'll all be handled internally at Ohio State, which is great. And you have Columbus and Buckeye Nation and all that will help you kind of extend the cap to some degree. But more or less, the playing field is as level as it's been since NIL started. And if we're being honest, probably before. So is that a good thing? And Ross Bjork talked about having a guy like Matt Patricia on staff because he's been in the NFL where everyone has the same salary cap, right? And he talked about using him to help look at how you value positions with monetarily value positions in the NFL. Because if you are in the NFL, everyone has the same resources, right? So you have to pick and choose as your team. Okay, we're going to spend this much money here and this much money here, maybe a little more here and a little less here. And so Matt Patricia's gone through that, not only as an assistant coach, a defensive coordinator with New England Patriots, but as a head coach with the Detroit Lions. And so bringing that, and obviously Ryan Day's coached in the NFL, but bringing that into some of this decision-making on kind of how to use that money that's the same across everybody is beneficial. And look, I think we've talked a lot about the benefits of Matt Patricia and his experience and all that. That is not something, at least I've thought about, is, how he helps them with roster management, and all of that. So an interesting, perspective from Ross Bjork, because yes, things are different. Ohio State isn't going to be able to pay more than a bunch of other programs now. You will still be able to push it with NIL stuff, but that revenue sharing, which is the big chunk of what players will make, is now going to be the same for basically everybody. A question I asked about, and actually Ross Bjork brought it up earlier in the press conference, but I followed up on it, the game day atmosphere at Ohio Stadium. Now, if you haven't, I know Dave and J-Book talked about this. I wrote about this yesterday. Ross Bjork is in favor of more night games. And we've talked about this on several episodes of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. He went to bat for trying to get that Texas game off of the noontime slot. And he talked about that. You can read about it on Bucknuts. I know J-Book and Dave talked about it. So I'm not going to rehash all of that. But that is part of it, having more night games, because he said that. I think he brought up night games without being asked about it like 4 or 5 times. But he also talked about some of the things they can do from a music standpoint, from lights, especially if there's night games, things like that to just re-energize Ohio Stadium in, not that it is a bad atmosphere at all. And we saw that during the Tennessee game last season, but how can you make it better? There's also the growing issue of getting fans to games. And this isn't just an Ohio State thing. This isn't just a college football thing. This is across sports right now. Watching the game on television, sitting on your couch, having your own drinks, having your own food, it's a lot easier than going to the games, right? And I know I'm a person, I love to be at games, regardless of the sport. Watching on TV is great, and the camera angles and the replays and all that. But especially for big games, I love to be at sporting events. But I know not everyone feels that way. And so how do you get people to go to Ohio Stadium in the first place? And, not that the Buckeyes have issues drawing, but you want to continue that demand. You want people to want to go to these games, and then you want them to come back. And he talked about things like, they're going to update the scoreboard. They're going to update the ribbon bands around there. Things that allows you to do different things as well. Those will probably be done for the 2026 season. They obviously have announced the premium seating that's going to go in the south end zone. He talked about moving the band to the north end zone because of that. Well, now that actually frees up more room for Block O to get more students in there, right? Ohio Stadium's different than a lot of places because you do have that horseshoe shape, and the student section has for a long time been in that south end zone that used to be open. You think about a place like Penn State. Well, you can just put all of the students together. Well, at Ohio Stadium, unless you want to move everything around, which would be pretty difficult at this point, you've got students in the south end zone. You've got some students in North Block O, but then you kind of got students just scattered around because there's so many students and those sections aren't big enough to fill them all. Ideally, like at Penn State, like other programs, you'd love the students to all be in one spot, and that's where the noise kind of comes from. Ohio Stadium just isn't set up that way, or at least they haven't set it up that way. So how do you do other things using technology, using sound? And then he talked about things like the concourse and dumpsters that are out. I don't think you see them, but it just takes up space, right? And you obviously need that to, I see it every time. If you've ever watched on Instagram, I do sort of my thoughts on the game as I leave the stadium. Follow me on there if you want. It's _Pat_Murphy. I enjoy doing those. I think people have fun with them. And you get to see kind of the inside of Ohio Stadium late after games. And usually I'm walking by the cleanup crews, and they're dumping stuff and whatnot. So how do you kind of use that space better? Obviously there's bathroom issues and things like that still need to be addressed. And you want to make the game day experience, and this was kind of the takeaway, as easy for fans as accessible to get to things, so you're not waiting forever for the bathroom or for food or drinks, all that. And then you want to make it enjoyable when you're out in the stands. You want to create the best game day atmosphere possible. And these are things that Ohio State is working to do. Obviously Ross Bjork comes from Texas A&M. He was at Ole Miss. Like he has seen some of the best atmospheres in college athletics when we're talking football. And he would love to figure out ways to make those things happen in Columbus in the best way you can with Ohio Stadium. He acknowledged Ohio Stadium is I think he called it an aging stadium, an older stadium. You can't just cheers to Ohio Stadium. You can't just renovate it and make it great. And they're not going to tear it down and build a new stadium anytime soon. So what can you do to make it as good as possible? And those are things that I think we'll find out more about in the coming weeks, months. It sounds like, it'll be a gradual improvements and different things that they are going to do throughout the year. But again, more night games, that would definitely help. And then while we've talked a lot of football, he did talk about, and he was asked about like other sports that, let's just use men's basketball because that's an easy one. But you could apply this to a lot of sports outside of football. So if you are Ohio State men's basketball, you are not the top dog, right? That's football. So the money that you are getting from the revenue sharing is probably not going to be the same as Duke, North Carolina. Even some teams in the big, Illinois, Michigan State, like they're going to put more resources into men's basketball because those are major programs for them than they will, percentage wise, probably than Ohio State is, because Ohio State is a football focused school. I don't think we have any doubt about that. So like, how do you compete? How do you continue to be successful if you are one of those programs? And Ross Bjork talked about, you've got to continue with, the things more so that you've done in the past, the recruiting, the coaching, things like that to kind of build, if we're talking men's basketball, build it back up. Obviously, there is a path for Ohio State to be successful at both football and basketball, and it doesn't require this, the money. You think back to 2006, 2007, when Ohio State played in the national championship game against Florida in both football and basketball, right? It wasn't because of money then, right? There may have been money getting paid to some of those guys, but it wasn't about NIL or revenue sharing or anything like that. Now that the landscape has changed, no doubt about it. If you are Ohio State, you're going to have to figure out a way. If you want top players on your college basketball team, you have to pay them. That's just how it works these days. So you are working at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to that, but there are other ways to make it up. And you think about professional sports, small market teams versus big market, especially in look at the NBA finals right now. You've got two small market teams in the Pacers and the Oklahoma City Thunder that have, the Pacers knocked off the Boston Celtics. They knocked off the Cavs. Teams like that, they're not necessarily spending as much money as those teams, but have figured out ways to have success and have done things a different way to build their teams into NBA finalists. And so I think, and Ross Bjork used that. I think it was an example for a response to a different question, but like the Supermax and building your team with 3 stars as opposed to building your team with, less 3 superstars versus, a more evenly dispersed roster. And I think, again, you look at those teams in the NBA finals, there's teams with a lot of depth, each has a star, no doubt about it. And maybe, some budding stars, but it's not like they're paying absurd amounts of money to get to that point in the season. So yeah, it was a very informative press conference with Ross Bjork. He obviously talked about a lot more. And again, if you want to watch the full video, and I recommend it because I think it was very informative, It's up on the Bucknuts YouTube page. So feel free, if you're watching this on YouTube, just click over to that once you're done. There was a lot more. I thought about how much I wanted to talk about on this, and I wasn't going to be able to get to everything, but I am going to write something, if you are a Bucknut subscriber, on kind of my takeaways from it, which will be up probably before you hear this podcast if you're not watching this live. So take a look at that. But again, I thought it was really informative. I thought it was worth your time, even though it is a long press conference, to kind of get a sense of where Ohio State is and the athletic department in general, not just Ohio State football, which Ross Bjork said is a consistent force and should still be for a long time. So I'm going to sign off. I think we covered a lot here in just under an hour. Thanks again to Bill for jumping on, Bill Kurelic, to give us some recruiting insight. It's been quite the June, and we're not even halfway through with these recruiting camps, or these one-day camps, and these 7-on-7s and the weekend. I know Bill is up to here in work, so I appreciate him jumping on. Anyone who watched this live, listened, all that stuff, I appreciate that. Please, if you're watching this on YouTube, turn on notifications, give us a thumbs up, and you get all our videos. If you've noticed, we've had some recruiting videos on there, talks with prospects. We'll have plenty more. We're not far now, just about a month and a half from Big Ten Media Days, so it's coming fast. The football season will be here before we know it. And if you are listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please give us a 5-star review, leave comments, all that good stuff. We do really appreciate it. Anyway, Buckeye fans, thank you for tuning in for this Bucknuts Happy Hour. We'll talk again next week. Cheers.